Hello, hello. Now for the English part of the presentation. So I call this talk Understanding Technology. That's the name, that's my contact information, Twitter, email, blog, where you can read all about Appsterdam and all about the stuff that we're doing. The idea for this presentation is basically what we, the app makers, would like to tell you, the commente, about technology, what we would like you to understand. And when we talk about apps, we talk about technology, we'll tend to use these two words interchangeably, as we'll see that they're rather related. But first, I feel like if we're going to talk about technology and we're going to talk about the city, we have to kind of address the most recent elephant in the middle of the room, if I might use the American expression. This thing that we kind of have to talk about before we even assume that you think technology is a good idea. Because when we're talking about, from a government standpoint, there's pretty much nothing worse you can imagine than having your city burned down by its own people. The rioting we saw in the UK, for example, seen, especially outside of Europe, as being a sign of just sort of general instability in Europe. And when people looked at this, this tragic circumstance, and they tried to find a bad guy, if you will. They tried to blame somebody for this. They found that most sinister of apparitions, dun dun dun, Twitter. I mean, there's serious talk in the UK, for example, about banning Twitter and banning social networks because it contributes somehow to social unrest. And not just in Europe. I mean, we've also seen in the Middle East, for example, these Facebook revolutions, these Twitter revolutions, and this idea that maybe technology is not such a good idea if it's enabling people to do things that are not good for society. But there's a misconception here. There's a basic wrongness to this idea, and the cost of that, the opportunity cost of that, is actually tremendous. Because the thing is that Twitter didn't cause riots. Facebook doesn't cause revolutions. I mean, we've had revolutions and riots for centuries before we had any of these things. The thing is, these are just, technology, this is just a communication tool. The way that a telephone or email or regular mail or anything is a communication tool. People are talking to each other, people are organizing, and people are pissed off. That's always true. Technology has nothing to do with that. If they weren't meeting over Twitter, they'd be meeting in pubs. Twitter is really just a public bar chat. The opportunity cost of having the wrong idea about this is that the difference between the way that things work now with things like Twitter and the difference between before, people are still pissed off and people are still talking to each other, but now you can actually listen. Now you can actually hear the people, read the people, see the people complaining. You know that they're pissed off before it comes to the point where they're burning the place down, right? And moreover, there's an opportunity that's presented. And this is true of social media, this is true of technology, and this is true in general, as a basic concept. You get to decide how people see you. As a government or as a corporation, you're sort of this big, faceless entity, like a ghost that pushes people around, or some kind of giant, rampaging robot. And when we act like robots online, I mean, people like robots in the real world, but in the virtual world, people hate robots. Robots are irritating. Robots are a waste of time. And nobody wants a robot. Nobody wants to see the government as being a big marauding robot. But people love heroes. You have the opportunity to be a superhero. With Twitter, for example, as a trivial example, people are pissed off, people are having a hard time with the system. Are you going to say something ridiculous and robotic to them, or are you going to actually help them solve their problem? Because if you can actually help them solve their problem, then they're really going to love you for that. The way that you are seen by people is very much something that you should always keep in mind. Do you want to be an evil marauding robot, or do you want to be a superhero? So, what does all this have to do with apps and mobile and technology and all of that? The only way that we can really answer that question, I think, is to look at the grandest scope of things, to go all the way back to the beginning of machinery, if you will. Because really, when we talk about machinery as a specific subset of technology, the first machines are actually older than mankind. The first primate to pick up a stick and use it to fish lunch out of a log. This was the invention of the tool. This was the invention of the machine. This was the height of technology at one time. And you might say that this launching force, this idea of using something from nature as a tool, is what launched us into the era of machinery. It was the predecessor to where we are now. We might call it the wooden age of machinery. And then, of course, hominids came along, even possibly pre-Homo sapiens came along, and they did more than just take things from the environment. They actually applied effort. They actually applied attention. And they made purpose-built tools. Not very impressive tools, but it was, again, the dawn of a new age, this stone age of machinery. Now, if we skip forward a bit to where we have machines as we think of machines, as things that are made of metal and rubber and belts and different parts that are working together, you know, this is something that, again, it changed the way we do things, right? Going from these very simple machines to complex machines that can actually do things that we ourselves cannot do. They're not merely helping us, they're enabling us to be more than simply human, bringing us to a sort of iron age. Improvements upon this, things like the assembly line, things like interchangeable parts, it brought us to a yet new era, an industrial era, an era of being able to produce machines for everybody. And not only that, to be able to produce different machines simply by changing the configuration of the assembly line, taking us to what you might call a steel age, an improvement upon that iron age. Well, and this brings us finally to computers. About World War II, a brilliant mathematician by the name of Alan Turing had this realization that if you had a machine that was built of a number of switches such that you could reconfigure the machine or program the computer, you could create a universal machine that would be not one machine, but theoretically an infinite number of machines. This is what we talk about when we talk about computers. This was the launch of what we might call the Copper Age. Well, then computers eventually became small enough that people, rather than just governments, could afford them, and they became small enough that they could actually fit into your house rather than being the size of your house, which launched us into this new age, this age of personal computing, this age where a computer, this universal machine, was in the realm of anybody. You might call this the Silver Age, this desktop PC age. I'm sure that most people in the room remember that shift. But there's been yet another shift, a fundamental shift. When we talk about especially mobile devices, when we talk about something like the iPhone or the iPad, we're talking about a computer that is truly personal. A computer that not only is in your house, but is in your pocket, that you carry in the crook of your arm the way you carry your own child. A computer that is small enough yet powerful enough that it can actually become part of you and part of your life. And that brings us to where we are, this golden age of technology that we find ourselves in. And if we look yet further afield, there will come a time when you no longer program a computer as a universal machine, but you change what the machine itself is. In centuries, perhaps, when we have these nano machines, when we can actually reconfigure and redefine what a machine is in a very real physical sense, when you can take one thing and turn it, as if by magic, into another thing. This future age, this diamond age. Well, there are a couple of trend lines that we can draw from this. There's a trend line of hardware. This is all hardware. Everything from a stick to a nano colony, this is all hardware. But then there's also the configurability of it, right? There's the usefulness of the machine. There's the ability to change the machine, and that is the software trend line. And these two things are converging. And when we get to the point where a machine is itself programmable entirely at the molecular level, then hardware and software will really be the exact same thing. But there's another trend here. There's a dawn, if you will. We're standing at the beginning of something, and we're looking forward to a future. We are standing at the precipice of the age of magic in computing, where it's not about reading a book on your computer, it's about turning your computer into a book. This is where we are now. You can have all of the world's knowledge on your lap without wasting any of the world's paper. Everything becomes cheaper and easier, and there's greater access. But it's more than just about universal books, because this is a book that you can turn into a piano. This is closer in concept to a nano colony than it is to Microsoft Word. This is how we think of software these days. We do not think of it as something that happens on a computer, we think of it as something that happens to a computer. We think of transforming the hardware, using the software into a complete and productized experience. That is what we talk about when we talk about apps. And that is what we talk about when we talk about Appsterdam. So what does all of this teach us about, then, technology? What then does technology mean? Technology is not about computers. I mean, the thing is, if you ask most people, what does technology mean? They'll tell you, it's about like computers and stuff. But technology really has nothing to do with computers, not really. In an economic sense, technology basically means new stuff, right? If you ask an economist, a student of the human experience, they will tell you that technology is all about new stuff. Fire was once technology. The wheel was once technology. A stick was once technology. One day computers will be as commonplace as these things, and they will no longer be technology. And when we talk about technology, we'll be talking about nanomachines and things like that. But there's even more to it. When we actually look at the literal definition of the word technology, if we actually break this down into its two Greek roots, being techno and logia, I'm not going to pretend that I'm pronouncing those correctly. What does this mean? You know, techno means the art, the skill, the craft of something. And of course, logia means the theory or the science of something. So technology literally means the science of art. Or as Steve Jobs would say, it's the intersection of technology and liberal arts. Well, this is not a very good definition of technology because it contains the word technology. It's very recursive, but you know, only nerds will appreciate that. But the thing is that the point that this graphic that Apple likes to trot out, the point of this graphic is that we have lost the art from technology. When we think of technology, we think of science, we think of engineering. We do not think of art, we do not think of creativity. We think of these as separate things. And so you might overcompensate for that and say you have to also add the liberal art. But the important thing that we understand is that this is not necessary. Technology already contains in the word art. It is the intersection of art and science. That is the literal definition of technology. What is the upshot of all of this? This is all a bunch of wonderful theoretical nonsense, but what does this actually mean for you as people who are trying to provide something for people? What this means is that you need to emphasize the experience. What this means is that when people talk about and think about technology, the thing they tend to forget are the people. The people who are actually the victims of this technology, shall we say. The people who are intended to have their lives, their jobs improved by this technology. And we tend to underemphasize them. And so much in the same way that your doctor might tell you, well, you should eat more omega-3 oils, they're really good for you. It's not really that they're good for you, it's that you need a balance between those and, you know, and the unhealthy oils, right? Well, it's the same thing. It's about science, it's about the people. It's a balance of those two things, but in real life, we tend to just forget the people altogether. So if we concentrate on the people as if that were the only thing, we actually end up with a very nice balance. It's very easy to take something as wonderful as that, you know, piano we saw earlier and turn it into something that is horrifying. This is actually from another presentation I do, and I take this step by step, and I show how one perfectly logical business decision after another leads to this. This is, like so many applications, something that actually has more features than its competitor, than GarageBand, the other app that we saw. But it's obviously terrible.